Haven Point, Tennessee, 9 a.m., Thursday. The sky hung heavy with clouds, as if something was about to break. An 18-year-old boy stepped into Crownline Motors dealership, a folder of pre-printed documents in hand, payment ready. But because of his worn-out shoes and the color of his skin, he was never asked, "What's your name?" Haven Point, Tennessee, Thursday, 10:15 a.m. The sky was holding its breath, that thick, humid stillness signaling an early summer storm was near. Amid the hum of cars gliding down the eastbound highway skirting town, an old sedan slowly pulled into the lot of Crownline Motors, a small but polished showroom nestled quietly between old repair garages and a retro-style barber shop. The car door opened. Jalen Rivers stepped out. 18 years old, a face still bearing the softness of youth, but eyes far more grounded than most his age. He wore a plain grey windbreaker, black cargo pants, and a pair of white Nike sneakers, frayed at the edges and faded with time. Tucked under his left arm was a sealed blue plastic folder. Inside, 5 printed sheets, a carefully researched list of used hybrids he'd narrowed down: Honda Insight, Toyota Corolla, Hyundai Sonata, all under $15,000, each with fewer than 80,000 miles, all with clean mechanical checks. He wasn't here to show off, wasn't here to just browse. He was here to buy, with money he'd saved, an entrance scholarship, a graduation reward, and the belief that if you prepare well, you'll be respected. Crownline Motors was the dealership he'd chosen after 3 weeks of searching. Not because it stood out, but because it had the 2016 Corolla he wanted. He had called earlier this morning, but no one answered. Still he came. Because today was the day he set aside for a milestone: buying his first car. As he stepped through the glass door, he held it open for a middle-aged woman on her way out. She smiled and nodded. "Thank you, sweetheart." He gave a small nod in return, but behind the reception desk, there was no smile, no welcoming eye contact, only the sound of keys clacking and a silence as thin as glass. Jalen didn't know it yet, but in just a few minutes, what would unfold here would forever change the way he saw the world, and ensure that this dealership would never again dare to underestimate a name like Jalen Rivers. The front desk remained expressionless as Jalen approached. The woman behind it didn't look up right away. Only after he stood still, politely waiting a few seconds, did she speak, her eyes still fixed on the screen. "What do you need?" The tone wasn't exactly hostile, but it wasn't warm either. It was the kind of voice kept in the throat, ready for someone who wasn't welcome. "I'd like to take a look at a few hybrid models listed on your website," Jalen replied, voice steady and polite. He gently held up his folder. "I printed out the listings, especially the silver 2016 Corolla, license ending in 4X5. She looked up. For the first time their eyes met. But hers didn't stop at the folder. They scanned his shoes, his faded windbreaker, his still young face, then dropped. A short, strained smile followed. "Are you here with a parent?" Jalen hesitated slightly. "No, ma'am, I'm buying on my own. The money in the account is mine." A blink, then she gestured toward the glass doors. "Head out to the lot. Someone will be with you shortly." He stepped outside. The heat radiated off the concrete in heavy waves. Sweat began to gather beneath his jacket. But Jalen didn't sit, didn't lean on the wall. He stood upright, folder pressed flat against his side. The way someone who's used to being judged tries not to cause trouble. 5 minutes passed. No one came. He turned toward the cars. The silver Corolla was still there, exact VIN match. He took one step forward, then stopped. A tall man in a red polo shirt with the Crownline Motors logo stepped out, clipboard in hand, striding toward him. "What do you need?" The voice wasn't harsh, but the absence of interest was jarring. "I was hoping to ask about this Corolla. If I could see the interior and—" "You're not with anyone?" "No, sir. I brought the details here." He raised the folder. "I tried calling earlier this morning." The man didn't look at the documents. His eyes stayed on Jalen, scanning him as if searching for proof he didn't belong. "We've had a few incidents lately," the man said. "People coming to take pictures, messing with the cars. Not saying you're one of them. But you get it, right?" Jalen swallowed. "I just came to buy a car." The man exhaled sharply, gave a short, dry chuckle. "Next time, come back with an adult, okay? Someone who can talk real finances. Around here, we deal with serious buyers." In that moment, Jalen understood. It wasn't because his paperwork was incomplete. Wasn't because his account lacked funds. Wasn't because the car was too expensive. It was because he didn't fit their idea of who drives away in that Corolla. Sweat from his palm soaked into the folder's edge. Jalen said nothing more, didn't react, didn't apologize. He simply looked at the man, then at the car, and turned away. Above him, light rain began to fall. But what had truly been soaked was the pride of an 18-year-old, stripped silently, without anyone inside that room bothering to give it a name. The afternoon in Haven Point drooped under a thin curtain of rain. Jalen didn't say a word when he got home. He entered through the side door, slipped off his damp shoes, hung his jacket on the hook, and quietly placed the now crumpled damp folder on the dining table. Upstairs, his mother's steady voice still echoed from her home office. Camille Rivers was in a Zoom meeting with a group of medical advisors from Europe. That same voice, sharp, composed, precise. Every time she spoke about biotechnology and regenerative medicine, it seemed like nothing was impossible. But beneath the sheen of success was a mother, a woman who always kept part of her mind anchored to her only son. Hours later, when the keyboard fell silent and the office light clicked off, Camille descended the stairs. She saw Jalen sitting on the couch, his laptop open but untouched. The folder lay beside him, now flattened under a thick book. "Did you go see the car?" she asked, voice soft as ever. Jalen nodded. Some places were okay, but didn't get to test drive anything. "Why not?" He hesitated, then answered like reciting a formula. "They said I should come back with an adult, someone who can talk finances, and they seemed busy." There was no bitterness in his voice, only retreat, quiet and familiar, like something he'd come to expect. Camille didn't respond immediately. She just sat down across from him, watching him in silence for a long moment. And in that moment, she realized something that chilled her. Jalen wasn't angry. He had simply accepted it. She had seen that look before. At 16, when a teacher told her chemistry might be too hard for you. At 24, when she walked into a new research lab and everyone assumed she was admin staff. Acceptance, that reflex ingrained in those who must constantly prove they belong, even in spaces that should already be theirs. The 18-year-old boy in front of her, with a 3.9 GPA and a bank account built from scholarships, was now learning to endure in silence. Not because he lacked patience, but because he'd grown used to not being trusted at first glance. Camille stood up, quietly gathering the empty teacups from earlier. Her hands washed the dishes, but her mind began arranging the facts, Crown Line Motors. What was the name of the sales rep? Who were their insurance partners? How did their client management system operate? Her memory was anything but hazy. It was a cold, precise archive. Camille wasn't the impulsive type, but once she decided to act, every step followed like a clinical protocol. That night, after Jalen had gone up to his room, Camille opened her personal laptop, typed a few lines, made a call. The person on the other end sounded groggy and surprised. "Camille? Calling at this hour? What's going on?" Her voice was still calm, not raised, but heavier than usual. "I need you to help me pull the management structure of a dealership called Crown Line Motors." "What are you planning to do?" the friend asked cautiously. Camille looked out the window, where raindrops still tapped softly against the sill like the rhythm of patient resolve. "Nothing much, it's just that—" She paused. "Someone looked my son in the face today and told him he didn't belong." Haven Point, 8:27 a.m. the following morning. The sky was clear, but the ground still held streaks of last night's rain. The automatic glass doors of Crown Line Motors slid open once again. Same lobby, same reception desk, same glowing customer database screen casting its faint blue hue. But this time, the person walking in wasn't a boy in worn-out shoes. It was a woman in a sharply tailored navy suit, carrying a kind of power that didn't come from volume, but from absolute composure. The midnight blue Rolls-Royce Dawn parked outside didn't roar like a supercar, but even the way sunlight skimmed across its paint was enough to freeze every glance in the building for several seconds. Dr. Camille Rivers wore no jewelry, no bold lipstick, no flashy accessories to prove anything. Everything was already present, in her gaze. The kind of gaze that had passed through countless sterile boardrooms filled with doubtful faces, and never once slowed its stride. She placed a small leather bag on the reception desk, not hurried, not harsh. "Good morning," Camille said, eyes never leaving the receptionist, who was now frozen mid-keystroke. Good morning," the woman stammered. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Camille replied. "I need to speak to the manager." "I'll call someone right away." Within minutes, Martin Voss, general manager of Crown Line Motors, emerged from a side door. White shirt, loosely knotted tie, one Bluetooth earpiece still faintly blinking. He extended his hand politely. "Good morning, I'm Martin Voss. How can I assist you today?" Camille did not shake his hand. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a slightly crumpled folder. Faint water stains still visible on its blue plastic cover. She laid it on the counter with deliberate care, like presenting evidence. "My son brought this here yesterday." Martin blinked. I'm not sure I follow." "Jalen Rivers," she said, mentioning her son's name for the first time. 18, black, quiet, dressed modestly, printed out listings of 3 Corollas from your website, had a transfer-ready account. She paused. "And you?" Her voice never rose. "Refused to serve him." Martin shifted into defense mode. "I believe this may have been a misunderstanding. It's possible my staff didn't realize—" "No need for excuses," Camille interrupted, still calmly. "I didn't come here for an apology." The air in the lobby suddenly tightened. The receptionist stopped typing. A passing salesman paused mid-step instinctively. "I came to remind you," Camille said, "that if a boy with a 3.9 GPA, pre-printed documents, and a ready bank account still isn't considered worth speaking to, then how many others have you pushed out of this building just because they didn't look right?" Martin attempted a smile, but it couldn't find a place to land. Camille pulled out a matte black business card. Silver embossed text read, Dr. Camille Rivers, CEO, Helix Nova Biotech. She placed it on top of her son's folder, then delivered the final line, clean and complete. Next time, instead of asking if they have money, ask what their name is. And without another word, she picked up her bag, turned and walked away. The silver watch on her left wrist caught the morning sun as she passed the glass. A final warning, wordless, needing no repetition. Camille didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew that every step she took left a mark. A deep scratch in the minds of those who were used to judging with their eyes, instead of understanding with their minds. Outside, the Rolls-Royce waited, silent, like the lesson she came to deliver. Respect isn't a reward. It's the bare minimum to begin with. Inside the frosted glass office of Crown Line Motors, Martin Voss sat motionless after Camille left. No one spoke. The black business card remained on the desk, like a slow-burning mark searing itself into the wood grain. Outside, a few employees resumed their tasks, but all eyes occasionally flicked toward the office door. Not because of the luxury car, but because of the woman, whose words were measured just enough that no one could argue and powerful enough that no one would forget. Martin picked up the card again. The silver lettering felt cold and sharp, like Camille's final sentence. Next time, instead of asking if they have money, ask what their name is. A name. He mouthed the word as if he had never truly thought about its meaning before. In 15 years of running this place, how many customers had walked through the doors, and he couldn't recall a single name, because he never asked. Landon Burke, the employee who handled Jalen yesterday, was called into the office. He entered, nervous. As soon as the door shut, Martin asked, "You remember the boy from yesterday? Black kid, printed list of hybrids, came alone." Landon blinked. The one with the blue folder. I thought he was just browsing." "You didn't think. You guessed." Martin gently pushed the card across the desk toward Landon. "This is his mother. She came in today, not to demand anything, but to remind me, and you, that what we missed wasn't a sale. It was a person." Landon opened his mouth as if to respond, then froze. "Did you know?" Martin continued slowly. "That woman is the CEO of a biotech firm partnering with 3 hospitals in Nashville. If we had asked, if we had listened, if we'd looked beyond worn shoes, that boy would have been treated like a real customer." The air in the office turned suffocating. Martin wasn't angry. It was as if a veil had been lifted from his own eyes, and he was forcing the man across from him to see through it too. He finished, "From now on, anyone who walks into this place, we don't start with 'What do you need?' We start with, 'Hi, my name is,' and yours is." Not a policy, not a checklist, just a habit, one born out of respect. Landon nodded slowly. No protests, no defenses, only silence. The only thing left when someone realizes they were wrong. That afternoon, the skies over Haven Point were unusually still. The morning rain had stopped, leaving only darkened pavement and streaks of water on windshields. In the small kitchen, Jalen Rivers stood at the sink, gently tilting a newly opened bottle of water in his hand. His gaze was distant, fixed through the window, as if he were still standing in yesterday's parking lot. There was no phone call, no email, not a single apology ever reached him. And he wasn't waiting for one. His laptop remained open, the browser still displaying the website of a new dealership he'd found the night before. a place nearly 40 minutes outside Haven Point. But they'd replied to his email within 18 minutes, asking clearly about the car model he was interested in, offering test drive times and payment options. No one asked his age. No one insisted he bring an adult. Jalen reopened his banking tab. The balance was still there, intact. Only his faith in himself felt less than whole. He wasn't angry, just hollow. Like the morning rain had washed away, the eager spirit of an 18-year-old boy from the day before. Upstairs, a door opened. Dr. Camille Rivers had just wrapped up a meeting with biomedical research partners in Boston. She descended the stairs, quietly observing her son as he shut his laptop. "Find anything yet?" she asked. Jalen nodded faintly, not turning around. "Another dealership." They responded nicely. "I've scheduled a test drive." Camille nodded, poured herself a glass of ginger tea. She didn't mention what had happened that morning, didn't say she had brought Crown Line Motors to a standstill. She knew, if Jalen found out, he would have asked her not to do it. Not because he wouldn't appreciate it, but because he was the kind of person who endures in silence, afraid that speaking up sounds too much like complaining. Camille quietly watched as her son picked up the keys to their old car and headed for the door. He said, "Just going to drive around town a bit, clear my head." She nodded. "Don't forget your phone." "I won't." Same words, but a heartbeat dimmer. The door closed. Camille stood in the kitchen, her fingers tightening around the tea glass. Inside wasn't hot liquid, but a freezing memory. The day she was Jalen's age, coming home after being mistaken for a server at the very science conference she was presenting at. The only difference was Dash. That day, her mother wasn't there. And that was why today she had done what a mother must do. In her son's place. Crown Line Motors, executive conference room, 10 a.m. No cameras, no press, just the people who had been there the day before, and the quiet discomfort no one dared to name aloud. Martin Voss stood at the whiteboard, one hand holding a marker. On the table sat internal files, a few phones, and the matte black business card that Dr. Camille Rivers had left behind the afternoon prior. A single printed name whose weight still hadn't faded. "There's no formal complaint," Martin said slowly, "no threat letters. But I believe yesterday was the most serious wake-up call this dealership has ever received." A few employees sat in silence, faces thoughtful. Some were beginning to understand. Some, not yet. Martin turned to the glass wall, eyes settling on the gleaming silver Corolla parked in the far corner of the lot. Yesterday, a young man walked in, better prepared than 90% of the customers we've ever dealt with. He didn't yell, he didn't film, he simply walked out, because our own looks told him he didn't belong. He paused. The air in the room thickened. No one checked their phone. No one sipped their coffee. "And what makes me feel most ashamed," Martin continued, "is that my own son is the same age as that boy." Everyone looked up. Martin placed the marker down. "I used to think slapping a few slogans on the wall like customer first was enough. But clearly it's not. Starting today, all staff will undergo retraining, not on sales quotas, but on the power of the first look." A salesperson spoke up. "Are you sure you're not overreacting a bit?" Martin didn't turn. He simply held up Camille's business card. This woman could have had the press lined up with a single email, but she didn't. She simply walked in. To make us face the mirror we've been avoiding. No one said anything more. When the meeting ended, some left the room quickly. Others lingered by the glass wall, looking out. And from that closed room, Crown Line Motors began to shift course. Not because they were forced to, but because for the first time they were forced to face themselves. Late afternoon at Helix Nova Biotech, Dr. Camille Rivers sat alone in her glass-walled office, the golden light of the setting sun slanting through the trees, casting shadows across the oakwood desk. In front of her was a half-finished schematic on the monitor, a biological trial blueprint, but her mind was elsewhere. A pharmacy in Columbus, a conference hall in Atlanta, a boardroom full of white men when she was 30. She remembered the first time she was invited to speak at a regional medical forum. The audience applauded. But when the discussion began, one man raised his hand and asked, "Are you part of the communications team or a research assistant?" Camille had smiled, voice calm as ever. "Sir, I'm the one who developed the formula you're discussing." She had once stood behind lab glass, proving every number, only to have her name misprinted on a team report. Camille never needed to retell those stories, but they were the soil that grew the woman she had become, strong, in control, and quiet when anger stirred. Not out of weakness, but because she knew exactly when to speak and why. The reason she went back to Crown Line yesterday wasn't for pride, not even out of fury for her son. It was because of Jalen's eyes as he walked through the door. The eyes of someone already used to being underestimated. She had once worn those eyes, had spent her youth learning not to see her own face through someone else's gaze. Camille exhaled, gently touching the edge of the desk. She didn't want Jalen to spend the next 20 years learning that lesson the way she did. In her drawer was an old photo, herself, age 23, hair tied high, standing beside a rust-stained Honda Accord, beaming because she'd just been accepted into a PhD program. No one at Crown Line Motors knew that photo existed. No one knew she'd once had to use a temporary paycheck card to afford gas home after meetings where she hadn't even been allowed to speak. But yesterday she had spoken, not through words, but simply by showing up, at the exact moment it mattered. The next afternoon, the skies over Haven Point were still clouded with damp grey, but Jalen Rivers' mood was nothing like the morning before. He sat behind the wheel of the Nissan Altima his mother had been driving in the meantime, on his way to a smaller dealership, Valley Line Autos on the outskirts of town. No gleaming showroom, no automatic glass doors. Just a modest wooden office, a sun-faded sign, and 2 rows of parked cars. He wasn't expecting much, just to be heard, to be asked the right question. Jalen stepped inside, same old hoodie, same faded Nike sneakers. He brought the same folder as before, now refreshed with new, clean prints, carefully organized. The lesson from the other day hadn't crushed his spirit, only made him prepare better. A middle-aged man looked up from behind the counter. "Hey there, what can I help you find today?" Jalen lifted the folder slightly, voice steady. "I checked your website. There are 3 hybrid models under $15,000. I wanted to ask if they're still available." The man nodded. "You printed out the listings too? That's smart. Come on out back with me. Let's take a look at the Sonata first. Someone placed a deposit on it, but it's not final." No questions about his parents, no sideways looks, just the right opening line. "Got your eye on a specific one yet?" Jalen followed him out. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the clouds, hitting the metal awning with a soft, rhythmic ping. He didn't say much, but something inside his chest slowly eased. Not because of the car, but because for the first time he didn't have to explain his existence. That morning at Crown Line Motors, sunlight pierced through the layered glass panels of the second-floor conference room, casting a beam across the whiteboard still faintly marked with Q2 targets. Martin Voss, the dealership's general manager, arrived earlier than usual. No music, no coffee, no emails. He simply sat there, hands resting on the cold table surface, eyes lowered as if tracing the fault lines of a structural flaw. On the table lay the black-edged business card. Dr. Camille Rivers, CEO, Helix Nova Biotech. Beside it, the rain-creased folder, still faintly damp from 2 days before, containing the detailed hybrid listings Jalen Rivers had printed. Martin picked it up again. Page by page he read. Simple, organized. Exactly what someone prepared would bring. No signs of goofing off, as Landon Burke had claimed. No wandering, no troublemaking. Just an 18-year-old boy, trying to be taken seriously. Martin straightened in his seat, opened his laptop, and began typing a short internal email titled, "On How We See Others." He didn't write much, and he didn't apologize. He simply said, "Every customer who walks through the doors of Crown Line carries a story. Our job is to listen to that story before deciding whether they deserve our service. Jalen Rivers doesn't need special treatment because of who his mother is. He deserved respect because he did everything right. He prepared, he researched, he was polite, he was honest. That's what we once claimed in our service mission. And I think yesterday, we forgot. He didn't sign off with his title, just one line, Martin. When Landon read the email during lunch, he said nothing. He simply looked out toward the lot, where the silver Corolla Jalen had wanted was being wiped clean, its windshield catching the midday light. And for a moment, something in the reflection made it hard for him to see himself clearly. A week had passed. Jalen Rivers was getting used to his new Corolla, bought from a different dealership, one where no one asked if he had come with a parent, where the salesperson smiled when they saw the carefully printed pages he brought. He didn't talk much about what happened before. He didn't need to. But Camille knew her son had gone through something far greater than buying a car. He had learned a lesson about worth and recognition. On Monday morning, as Camille returned from a boardroom meeting with Japanese partners, she found a white envelope neatly placed in front of her office at Helix Nova Biotech. No return address, no company logo, just 2 handwritten words in neat, careful script. Dr. Camille Rivers. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, clear, steady lines, as if the person had thought long and hard before picking up the pen. We didn't see. Not out of malice, but because we've grown too used to not looking closely. The boy didn't raise his voice, but his presence echoed through our entire team. And you didn't walk in demanding justice. You walked in to remind us. Even silence has its limits. We are starting over. Thank you for helping us see that. No signature, no title, no apology. But Camille folded the letter with care, as if it were a living testament. That some change begins not with threats, but with the right reminder at the right time. She didn't post it online, didn't share it with colleagues. She slipped it into the inside cover of her planning notebook, where she kept mementos from her early startup years, her first clinic receipt, her research approval letter, and now, a note from a system that once dismissed her son. As she stepped into the hallway, a younger colleague greeted her with a slightly different look in their eyes. Not because of her title, but because there was something about the way Camille walked that made others want to stand a little straighter too. Saturday noon, The sky over Haven Point was a clear blue, the sunlight warm but gentle, the kind of day where no one needs to rush. Jalen stepped through the front door, grey t-shirt damp with a light sweat, a brand new car key dangling from his fingers. Not to show off, but simply because it was the first thing he had ever achieved entirely on his own. Camille was in the kitchen, pouring coffee through a filter, her eyes occasionally flicking to a project proposal on her tablet. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. "You got the car?" Jalen nodded, not overly excited, but with eyes steady and grounded. "I went with the Sonata, not flashy, but reliable. It's exactly the hybrid engine I was looking for." Camille paused for a second, then smiled faintly. "And how did they treat you?" Jalen shrugged. But it was the shrug of someone maturing, no longer sad, just observing the world for what it is. No one asked who my mum was. No one stared at my old shoes. They just asked, "What are you looking for?" Camille nodded, her voice low. "That's the question they should ask." No one said anything more. They didn't need to. No one had to say that the car wasn't just transportation, but a symbol of the first time he'd preserved his self-respect. In a world that often questioned it, no one had to bring up Crown Line Motors, because both mother and son knew there are battles that, if you need to explain them to be understood, it's already too late. Only the sound of the coffee maker hummed steadily, and Camille's eyes followed her son. As he walked out into the yard, car key glinting in the light, quietly but firmly. Sunday morning, in an empty parking lot behind an old shopping center in Haven Point, Jalen stood beside his new Sonata. He was coaching his younger cousin, Malik, on how to reverse park between the lines. "Slow down. Turn left a little more. That's it. Stop there." Malik grinned from the driver's seat. "You're like an actual driving instructor." Jalen just shook his head and smiled, but in his eyes there was something more. Something steadier, more grounded. Not prideful, but a kind of quiet strength recently earned. Not from winning, but from not breaking when everything said he should. Back home, Camille stood inside the kitchen window, coffee cup in hand. She watched from a distance as her son and Malik, two boys who just a few years ago had argued over game controllers, were now practicing how to handle a real car. Just beyond the glass sat an old photo. Jalen at 9, holding his district science fair award, swimming in an oversized t-shirt. Behind him in the photo was a beat-up silver Honda Accord. The car Camille had driven through her early years as a medical resident, the one that carried her through night shifts, and carried Jalen to preschool on freezing winter mornings. She hadn't started with wealth, but mile by mile, Camille had passed down to her son the one thing that mattered most, the kind of self-belief that asks no one's permission to exist. No lectures, no lessons on paper, just the way she lived, calm, timely, and unwilling to let the world's assumptions define her worth, a way Jalen had absorbed without realizing it. He didn't need Camille to tell him about the Rolls-Royce, and she didn't need to share what had happened at Crown Line. Because the things that matter most aren't passed down through words, they're seen, they're absorbed, and one day they're repeated. Like Jalen patiently guiding Malik's hands on the wheel. A simple gesture, but carrying with it an entire legacy. There was no press release, no live-streamed apology, no representative from Crown Line Motors appeared on TV to talk about staff retraining or commitments to diversity. But starting that Monday, the atmosphere in the dealership's weekly morning meeting felt different. In Martin Voss's internal email, Not long, not ceremonial. There was one short sentence at the end. From now on, never judge a customer before they speak, and never stay silent when someone on our team does. No one was fired, but glances shifted. New conversations began quietly, like, "Did you see the kid yesterday? Kinda reminded me of Jalen. I think maybe we should ask what he needs first." Subtle changes began to take hold. The customer greeting process was rewritten. A module on unconscious bias was added to the onboarding training. And notably, in the updated performance review, customer engagement attitude was scored separately. No longer tied solely to the number of cars sold. No one said it out loud, but everyone remembered the woman who stepped out of a midnight blue car, placed a rain-damp folder on the desk, and, without ever raising her voice, simply said, "You just missed someone. And it wasn't just my son." After that, when another high school student walked into the showroom, alone with a printout from the website no one asked if his parents were with him. Instead, a young staffer stepped forward and smiled. "Hi there, how can I help you today?" That story never made the news. No one posted about it online, but it spread quietly like an undercurrent. And everyone who witnessed it knew some changes don't need to make noise. They just need a truth, spoken at the right moment. The silver Toyota Corolla sat parked in front of the house, still gleaming with the sheen of its most recent wash. No temporary plates, no ribbon, no congratulatory banners, just a modest, clean, quiet car. But for Jalen, it was a complete victory. He didn't post about it, didn't take pictures, didn't tell his friends the backstory. That weekend afternoon, he sat behind the wheel. The window rolled down a little. A soft breeze swept through his neatly cropped hair. The radio wasn't playing music. Just the gentle hum of the engine, steady as the breath of someone finally at peace after a long road. Camille stood on the porch, tea in hand, untouched, watching her son slowly reverse out of the driveway. No instructions needed. No reminders. The boy who once gripped a plastic folder with sweaty, trembling hands was now holding the steering wheel. With those same hands. The first drive wasn't far, just around the block, then down a lakeside road. But for Jalen, it was the first time he had driven straight through a barrier that society once placed in his path. No more feeling the need to prove himself, no more questioning, "How will they see me?" Just a quiet, steady certainty that he knew exactly who he was. Jalen didn't need applause, didn't need revenge. He just needed not to let what happened steer his life off course. At the next intersection, the light turned yellow, then red. He stopped, perfectly on the line. On the sidewalk, a white woman waited to cross. Their eyes met. Jalen gave a polite nod. She smiled, simple, ordinary. But enough. Some battles are invisible. Some victories have no audience. But for a young man like Jalen, holding on to silence, while still holding his head high, was how he redefined himself. And the world, little by little, would have to learn to see him anew. Not through shoes, not through jackets, not through his birth year, but through an unwavering gaze, through a steady hand on the wheel, and through the new roads he would carve for himself with every turn of his own tires. The car was just the vehicle, but self-respect, that was the destination. Not everyone has a mother who pulls up in a Rolls-Royce to demand justice. Not everyone encounters someone willing to admit they were wrong. And not everyone gets the chance to step out of silence. But there's one thing anyone can hold on to, and that is Never let someone else's gaze define your worth. Jalen Rivers didn't fight back, didn't shout, didn't seek revenge. He simply kept walking. And in that quiet, when backed by what is right, an entire system was forced to confront itself. This isn't just a story about a car that was denied. It's a story about a young man who almost believed he wasn't enough, a mother who had once been dismissed because of bias, and a small moment where change didn't begin with a scream, but with a presence that refused to be ignored. If you've ever been pushed aside because of how you looked, if you've ever stayed quiet because you thought your voice didn't carry, if you've ever chosen to walk away instead of making a scene, know this: you are not weak. You're just waiting for the right moment to let the world know you've been here all along.